and Compliance, currently leading the non-federal audit team at the United States Department of Education Office of Inspector General. A certified fraud examiner, another fun job. Mark complements his credentials with a BS and BA in accounting. His expertise spans auditing standards, risk management, and quality assurance. Throughout his tenure, Mark has been pivotal in refining audit guides and fostering collaboration with the department officials, trade associations, and professional associations. Especially in relation to those fun single audit reports. Kenny Poynter is the Executive Director of the National Association of State Auditors and Comptrollers and Treasurers. He's responsible for the overall operations of the organization as well as their programs. The organization facilitates efforts to improve state government transparency, accountability, and financial reporting. He's been with the organization since 1987. 1989. It's
Long
close.
time.
It's close. Well, I won't go on and say anything else wrong about your background. So Mark, unless they'll let you go,
It's not
and they'll give you the mic.
okay. All right. Can you? I don't know. These microphones. All right. Yeah. So my name is Mark Priebe. As Sheila mentioned, I been in the single audit world since 2011. Way back when they used to refer to it as the A133, and we had all the other circulars for audits. In my current role as the director of the non-federal audit team, I started in 2017. And basically, my team is charged with under the IG Act with ensuring audit quality. So my team will, like what I like to say, is audit the auditor. So we go out behind the audits, the auditor that audits the higher education or the LEA or the SEA, and we're just making sure that they are following the audit guidelines and they're doing it correctly. That's one of the things we do, and then on top of that, we also write the audit guides for the proprietary schools for the education side. We work on the compliance supplement for any of those that are familiar with that, which is basically the directions for how the auditors are going to do the audit. Since starting with at OIG, increasingly interested in the data behind the single audit, and I was working on a group prior to the pandemic. It was called the SARM, which is a single audit risk management group, and that's kind of how I met Michelle with XBRL, and the rest is history as far as that goes. And I've just been trying to work with other federal agencies, other federal partners that are in the same role as myself in moving towards the data driven, the data standard, and being able to use XBRL or whatever it would be to access the data and use the data more in an easier way. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's all I got. Sorry.
Okay, do you want to go and then we'll ask questions?
That sounds good. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Well, good morning. My name's Kenny Poynter. As Sheila introduced me, I just want to thank Sheila. I want to thank Michelle Savage and members of the XBRL team for inviting us here today. As Sheila indicated, I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of State Auditors, Comptrollers, and Treasurers. As such, we represent the state's top financial officials, all three, auditor, comptroller, treasurer. Just a little quick background, about 183 organizations are members of NASACT. You would think, gosh, that the guys at CPA should have better math than that. 50 states, auditor, comptroller, treasurer, should be 150, right? Well, some states have more than one auditor, controller, or treasurer, and plus DC in the U.S. territory. So that's how we get to 183. Within those 183, by the way, 21,000 professional employees. So I always say we're small in a way, but pretty big in another way. It's good to see colleagues and friends here. I know it's a big meeting when I see not only the chairman of the GASB, but also the vice chairman of the GASB here today. So I know this is an important meeting when I see both of them. And lastly, before we go to questions, just a typical disclaimer, my views and my statements here today are my own and not official positions of NASACT. I like my job. I want to keep it. So,
I guess I should second that as well.
Can you, Mark, give us more details about what exactly the GREAT Act was and its goals?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the GREAT Act or have read up on it, and it couldn't have come out at the worst time, given that the pandemic hit us in March of 2020. So the GREAT Act, was signed into law on December 30th, 2019. And it laid out some pretty hefty goals and plans, as far as digitizing the single audit and just the way the federal government was going to get the data. So obviously, you're all aware that we haven't hit the federal government. The act has not hit any of the deadlines that were in there. So one of the other areas that I wanted to point out within the GREAT Act too was that they did not authorize any additional funds to be used in order to do this. So obviously that's not going to be high on the priority list of an agency or agencies to gather together to digitize single audit to get the data, but not have any funds available in order to do so. So did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'll add a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I was kind of thinking we would talk to it.
Yeah.
It's more of like a conversation.
That's
So
fine. Yeah, you can, he mentioned the single audit report. Can you kind of describe that?
Yeah, I
How
will.
it's
Just
prepared and used?
quickly, just a little background. I know today we're talking about really two different statutes. I want to make that clear up front. I think most of you probably know that, but just to be sure, we have the Financial Data Transparency Act, FDTA, and that affects who? Well, it affects the issuers of municipal debt. But we also have this GREAT Act, as Mark just talked about, issued way back in 2019, December, and Mark alluded to this, could not have happened at a worse time. We had a little thing called the pandemic that rolled around about 2.5 months later, and to OMB's credit, they had their hands full. And so, as Mark just mentioned, the GREAT Act is a little bit farther behind. But the GREAT Act, the difference in that and the FDTA is the GREAT Act affects grant recipients. So one affects issuers, the other affects grant recipients. Very similar. If we had more time, we could show you some data. There are a lot of commonalities and consistent terms. Data standards must be machine readable in electronic format. Affects both laws. Okay? And we'll get into more details. I want to talk to Sheila's point about single audits just a little bit. Give you some perspective. There's about 30 to 35,000 single audits conducted each and every year. The amount of federal grants that go out to recipients, state, local governments, and other not-for-profits, tribes, in 2022, $1.1 trillion. 1.1 trillion. Now that's inflated a bit by the pandemic, but typically runs $600 to $800 billion. Those are audited in a single audit. Okay, what does that mean? Those are due in 9 months. Some would say that's too long, but 9 months is the timeline. It includes an audit of all the federal grants within a recipient's jurisdiction, so a state, local government, not-for-profit, etc. And the reporting package, and we'll get to why this is important in just a second, but the reporting package and what is in a single audit, it's pretty voluminous, a lot of information there. It includes the financial statements. We've already talked about the ACFR a little bit today, extremely long, detailed. It also includes a schedule of federal expenditures, which is simply a listing of all the federal grants that the government or the recipient received by what's called assistance listing number. It also includes schedule of prior audit findings, auditors' reports, and then lastly, corrective action plans. What the auditor finds, the auditee has to say, hey, here's how we're going to fix it. And all of that gets submitted as part of the reporting package. I mentioned single audit reports, and I'll stop here, Sheila, in the interest of time. But there's an opinion on the financial statements by the auditor. There's also an opinion on that schedule of expenditures of federal awards, also known as the CFA. There's two reports on internal controls, one over federal grants, one over the Yellow Book findings and internal controls. Also, a report on compliance as it relates to the financial statements. Another report as it relates to the federal grant programs. And then lastly, a schedule of findings and questions cost. This is a summary of the auditor's results, findings related to the financial statements, and findings related to question cost on the federal awards. So I could go on, but I think in the interest of time, we better stop. I hope you get the idea. These are extremely long, complicated, but in my view, personal view, absolutely necessary to ensure accountability and oversight over those federal dollars. And I mentioned $1.1 trillion.
Both of you gentlemen, Mark, in relation to using the grant data, there obviously seems to be a lot being collected. How would digitizing that make your job easier? And then the same thing with the single audit, how would digitizing those make your job easier, but also public access or access to the auditors?
So personally, in my role with ensuring audit quality, to get the data in an easier and a faster way would help us to target instructions that we would send out to the audit firms or to the grantees of better ways for them to prepare their financial statements, or for the auditor to actually audit those financial statements. We use that. So in the IG shop, we use that data in order to, for my role, is to target which auditors we're going to look at or which grantees we're going to look at. But also in the audit, in the IG is we have audit services. So they're going to go out and they're going to audit different programs within the Department of Education. And from time to time, they're going to also audit different schools based on information they get. So if they have the data faster, or if they can compare it easier, so like do like a 5-year trend analysis or something like that, and they can see blips or they can see issues that they would be able to then go out and do like a program review or do an additional type of review in order to help that school rectify the situation, or the state agency or the local education agency or something like that. And then additionally, so like with the pandemic, I mean, I know you all are aware in this room of the billions, trillions of dollars that went out for the pandemic, and all the fraud that was associated with that, in whether it be unemployment insurance benefits or any of the other myriad of programs that were put out. If we had the data more available, we would have been able to probably target a little bit better where that money went and who it went to, and then we would be able to better track what it was spent on and how it was spent, and probably have prevented quite a bit of the fraud that was associated with the pandemic.
How about in relation to the single audit, would that make it easier? Or?
Well, I just want to touch upon, again, I'm going to repeat a lot of what Mark has said and what we've already heard earlier this morning from other speakers, but some of the challenges for users of single audit data. The one that I just want everybody to know, it's top of mind for us, is that our federal audit clearinghouse, where we submit all that information I just outlined, it has changed. For years and years, it was at the Census Bureau, and just this year that the housing in the federal audit clearinghouse changed over to General Services Administration. So we're in transition. So that's a challenge in and of itself, right off the bat. But other challenges, just other than having access to the data, state governments in particular, who I work for, we kind of sit in the middle of the stream. The dollars come from the federal government, but they get dispersed out to the states and then to many, many subrecipients, including local governments, authorities, special districts, not-for-profits. So the federal government, Mark's agency, the Department of Education, has responsibilities. But guess what? States have responsibilities too to monitor those subrecipients. And if we had data that was machine readable in a electronic format, then we'd be able to do our jobs more efficiently and effectively in terms of monitoring and fulfilling our responsibilities over subrecipients. Again, Mark mentioned if we had it more accessible, we could identify risk areas faster and perhaps prevent fraud and improper payments. I would just ease of analysis. We've heard that before. PDFs, everybody's mentioned that. That's the standard. As I was preparing yesterday, I thought, let me just take a look at some of these reporting packages. I looked at my own state, Kentucky. I used to work in the auditor's office there. 2022, their reporting package, 500 pages, all PDF. And I just thought, gosh, if I opened that up and if I really wanted to analyze that, it would be difficult. Not picking on my own state, that's what every state, I think, does right now,
Yes.
PDF. So it's daunting. It's daunting. Now, there was some salvation. It was bookmarked, so that helped some. But to be able to analyze the data in any depth is a challenge. So again, let me stop there. Better analysis, access to data could really allow our auditors to better assess risk. And I know you're going to hear more about this a little bit later today. Bob Hinkle's with us, the deputy auditor in Ohio. But there's a number of benefits if we had the information more accessible and in electronic format.
I would ask, we've heard that a lot of government officials don't even know that either one of these acts. So do your members know about these? And then if they do, what are their thoughts? Do they think it's cumbersome or too costly, or what's their?
Well, I hope they're aware of both of them. We've tried to make them aware many times. Cornelius Chevino, our DC director, is here with me today, and Emily Brock with GFOA. We've all worked together to try to raise the level of awareness. Honestly, I feel like we're in a holding pattern right now. And what I mean by that is on the FDTA, we're just waiting to see what comes from the SEC and others about the technology that's adopted, those standards that are adopted. And in the GREAT Act, we're again waiting to hear from OMB and HHS on exactly what that means. So I think, Sheila, to answer your question, we're supportive. I would say we're cautiously optimistic. I don't want to go through the long laundry list of challenges, but we do have some concerns: cost, complexity, especially for small either issuers or local governments. We are really curious about what technology is ultimately adopted, whether it's XBRL. The FDTA has a 4-year implementation from start to finish. A lot of things can happen in 4 years from a technology standpoint. So we're trying to embrace that and just really waiting to see. But I would say communication, collaboration, and cooperation are going to be the keys to having success with both of these. And that's why we're here to express our willingness to help. And I know GFOA would do the same. We want to weigh in on what is being considered and being proposed, because at the end of the day, we're going to be the ones responsible for implementation.
And I've had several conversations with OMB over the last 6 or 8 months. The GREAT Act is starting to pick up steam again now that the pandemic, fingers crossed, is behind us and we can start moving forward. The money that was put out for a lot of the grant money that was put out for the pandemic has either been expended or it's been clawed back by Treasury if it wasn't used, or it's at least obligated from the different entities that received it. I know there's a work group that's been stood up for the GREAT Act, that they're starting to look at it again as far as the deadlines and what they're going to have to do in order to get back on track. The GREAT Act specifically mentions XBRL, I believe, in the the actual language. So I've worked closely with Michelle over the past 4 or so years. They've developed taxonomies already. They've done a lot of work around the CIFA, and I believe it might be part of a demo later today, or if not, I'm sure if you stay on top of the XBRL website, you'll be able to see that where it's been used, or they have a demo that they've recorded or at some point or not. But it really is amazing what can be done with that data and how easy it is to get to it and use it. And then Kenny talked about cost being open source, and the market's going to probably drive most of that. And if it's open source, hopefully the more entries to the market will keep the cost low enough where even the smallest of the entities will still be able to afford transitioning into a data standard. So.
Yeah, it was mentioned that the FDTA has a 4-year implementation. Do you think that that's realistic? And also, I know that the GREAT Act passed in 2019. What timelines were that, and are governments meeting those timelines?
I have nothing on the FDTA. Sorry.
Well, the FDTA, I do think there's concerns around the 4-year, although that seems like a long runway. But I know for small issuers and even states, I think we are, at least as I said earlier, cautiously optimistic. Again, I hate to say it, but we're just really in an unknown state of position right now, because we're waiting to hear what is going to be proposed. The GREAT Act, as we alluded to earlier, they are already behind in some cases on their implementation dates. So, and again, I think it's not a criticism. We know that they were super busy with the pandemic.
I don't have any questions in the. Do you see them? I don't see any. I mean, I see the app. Do you have questions?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Slider.
Yeah, I just didn't see it. Okay. They're not coming through on mine. Okay. Mark, do you think that the GREAT Act and your single audit oversight have any overlap in practice with the USA spending.gov resources that came out of the Data Act?
Yeah. So if if the GREAT Act is fully implemented and we get to that point where single audits are submitted electronically, or in the case of education with the proprietary institutions, if their data is submitted electronically, it would only, at the minimum, it would bolster USA spending to the point where you would have 2 data points then to be able to verify what was reported to USA spending, and then you see on the back end the financials that are reported, do they tie? If not, is there huge discrepancies? Why is there a discrepancy versus what the agency says they gave to the grantee and what the grantee says they received or they spent on USA spending? So, I think that answers the question.
Now, there's a lot of data in this. There's a lot of narrative in the single audit reports. There's also a lot of narrative in the financial report. Do you know how that is being handled? And how that will be digitized consistently?
Yeah. So one of the things that I when I met with Michelle early on with learning about XBRL when I was working in the SARM work group was the fact that XBRL is taking that data and can take text boxes and bring them over and digitize them and all that, and you're getting exactly what is in the report without having to use an AI or a bot to scrub the PDF, and then you're potentially missing. Am I not talking? Oh. Potentially missing information in that text box. So with the taxonomy and XBRL being able to grab all that data, and then you're able to use it however you need to. The other option was with the charts. If there's graphs and charts in your financial information, your financial report, your compliance report, all that information is coming over and can be used by the agency or the public as far as wanting to do data analysis or whatnot. Do you have anything to add?
Do you anticipate there will be additional audit costs in relation to digitizing the single audit data?
From what I can tell, I mean, I don't feel there would be necessarily, like I mentioned earlier with the open market concept, and the ability for different entities to develop their own tools, the converters and that kind of stuff. There might be some initial upfront costs, maybe that converting, like whether the audit firm uses Teammate or if they use an in-house type program or something like that. That you're converting that software or whatever, so that then it talks to the XBRL, and converts it all and then sends it over to the government. But I don't feel like it's going to be like an exorbitant amount of added cost.
Yeah, I would just pick up on that a little bit. I'm not sure it will add a lot of cost either as it relates to single audits, because a lot of that reporting package and information is already captured in what we call a data collection form that is submitted to Census and now to GSA, and there is an Excel upload. And so I think if we can get even the text of the audit findings are there. Mm-hmm. If you get to Excel, presumably it's you can jump to structured data, XBRL, as an example, without a heavy lift. So I do think, at least on the single audit side, I don't see the cost increasing dramatically. The real kicker of this whole situation, to my opinion, are the financial statements. And the GREAT Act mentioned the financial statements as part of amending the Single Audit Act, and of course we know it's a big part of FDTA. To me, that's the heaviest lift.
Let's suppose that different standards are implemented for the FDTA versus the GREAT Act. What are the consequences of that?
I don't think they would be able to. I mean, one of the biggest things that came out of the SARM work group that I was in was the first step that they did was to standardize the data so that way across the board you were using the same term. Because I don't know if anybody here has dealt with HUD years ago when they used to call it HUD accounting before adapted GASB and that. So, but we're moving towards that. All agencies are going to use the same terms, same terminology, and single audit, same thing. So that way there isn't that issue of different standards. I just don't think that's going to be an issue.
And I would just echo that every chance I get, ever since the GREAT Act and then FDTA was passed, one message I've had, please don't create two different models for electronic financial statements. I mean, let's hope, and I think this is going to happen, fingers crossed, that SEC, Treasury are communicating with OMB and HHS, at least on the financial statement piece. Let's not have two different approaches, because that would be very costly and very confusing.
Now we hear a lot about all this information is in PDF format, and so aren't there tools being developed that are to convert this data into live data? So do you think this might become mute?
The only tools that I'm aware of in the PDF realm are basically AI bots that search the PDF, and you have to have a lot of code or a lot of I'm not an IT person necessarily, so I don't know all the terms. So if I use the wrong term, sorry. But basically, it's reading the PDF instead of you manually having to read it. But then it's gonna pull out those things. But if you don't put it in specifically how you need it to pull out, it's going to miss things. And if you don't, acronyms and that kind of stuff, the federal government's big on acronyms. So if somebody could have a different acronym for it, and it's going to miss it because you're only pulling a certain one that you're looking for, and the reportee called it something else. So it's very specific tool to each agency. So I don't know that there's one option where it seems that XBRL and going to the data standard model, and it's leaving the audit shop or the grantee already converted electronically, versus somebody having to take a PDF and turning it into electronic format.
Yeah, the one thing I would say about that, I mentioned it already, the 4 years is a long time in terms of technology. XBRL's time tested, it works. It's been working for the publicly traded companies for a long time, submitted into the SEC's EDGAR system. The taxonomy, which I haven't mentioned yet, the financial statement taxonomy, monitored by and updated by the FASB for the private sector companies and publicly traded companies. If that is the model for governments and issuers under FDTA, I think we would like to see the taxonomy created and maintained by the GASB to be on a consistent page with the FASB on the private side. To me, that just makes sense if we're using XBRL. I've emphasized the long runway a couple of times now. Technology is changing. I mean, we all know AI. It's almost scary what Chat GPT can do. Some people that I talk to say, "Gosh, you ought to be able to go in and to the PDF and to your point and your question, Sheila, and scrape the important data out of there, get the data elements." Mark raises the point about accuracy, completeness. Some people say it can happen and it's there today or close. Others say no way. I will tell you all yesterday, as a matter of fact, one of our members said we're using a new technology to scan leases for the relevant accounting terms, and it's not Chat GPT, it's Chat PDF. So we shall see. I mean, it just seems like it's changing every day.
The FDTA, it only applies to issuers of debt. It doesn't seem to accomplish, there's a lot of other governments that don't issue debt. Do you think that, the act should be expanded or added on to?
I would say let's take first steps first. This is a heavy enough lift as it is. Let's get this one under our belt, and then we'll worry about the rest of the smaller entities that don't issue debt. I would say one thing about another complexity, and again, there's lots of things to talk about here, but what about those governments that issue debt that don't follow GASB accounting principles? And what taxonomy will they follow? How will they file ultimately with the MSRB? And they're out there. They are out there issuing debt and not following GASB pronouncements.
Yeah, I know in our work, we do the 75 most populated cities, but we do not include New Jersey cities because New Jersey does not require the gap compliance. And just the last commentary from Mark Jaffe. HHS recently appointed a new Great Act lead. Hopefully he will get the Great Act back on track, the implementation back on track now that we emerge from the pandemic. So I want to thank our speakers and invite Mark and Campbell to join us.